Welcome to the Daily Report for June 20th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. On the weapons of war, a dispute and a diversion. The Israeli Prime Minister claims the U.S. has slowed its shipment of arms. The Biden team says not so. The flow of arms to Ukraine is changing, though. To get missiles there faster, administration officials say they are rerouting ones intended for other allies. The Supreme Court rules on the structure of the tax system, averting fiscal chaos. We'll learn about that and remind ourselves of how much more work the justices have ahead of them this term. We'll talk to the former governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels, about one-party rule, the dangers of a political system where power rests in concentrated hands. Plus, New York adopts a social media law for teenagers, an update on the fires and the heat, and extra time on the space station for the astronauts from the Boeing Starliner. And finally, a discovery of a vessel on the other end of the human timeline, a Bronze Age ship from the period where humans first sailed beyond sight of the shore and navigated by stars. Stars up where those astronauts are now spinning. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with sniping and discord in relations between the U.S. and Israel. 3 weeks ago, President Biden announced a roadmap to end the war in Gaza. Since then, Israel has accused the U.S. of withholding weapons. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dissolved his war cabinet, and the White House has canceled a strategic meeting with Israeli officials. Members of the Biden administration were supposed to meet with Israeli representatives Thursday to discuss threats from Iran. The White House is frustrated over Netanyahu's social media post accusing the United States of pausing weapon shipments, something the administration denies. White House spokesperson John Kirby called the video perplexing. Netanyahu responded to that Thursday, saying, quote, "I am ready to suffer personal attacks provided that Israel receives from the United States the ammunition it needs in the war for its existence." Meanwhile, the United States is shifting military policy to accommodate another global conflict, the war in Ukraine. The White House says shipments of air defense missiles that were intended to go to other U.S. allies will now be redirected to Ukraine. Kirby calls it a difficult but necessary decision.
This will ensure that we'll be able to provide Ukraine with the missiles they need to maintain their stockpiles at a key moment in the war. If any of our other partners were ever in a situation similar to Ukraine's, we would go to extraordinary lengths to support their security as well.
CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins me now. David, let's start with Ukraine. What do we know about the types of missiles that the U.S. is now fast-tracking to Ukraine?
Well, these are air defense missiles, and the most popularly known one is the Patriot air defense missile. And these are interceptor missiles used to shoot down incoming Russian missiles. And this is a very important move here because Russia was simply beginning to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses with their attacks on Ukraine cities. But by reordering the delivery of these air defense missiles, taking them away from other countries and putting Ukraine at the front of the line and putting this policy into effect for about a year and a half, this is going to mean hundreds of air defense missiles are going to go to Ukraine. And this is sort of a direct response to Vladimir Putin's long war strategy where he just wears down Ukraine. But this sort of almost guarantees that Ukraine will have sufficient air defenses at least to stay in the fight until next year.
Connected to that, we have this pact signed by Russia and North Korea, the Mutual Defense Pact that was signed. How much has North Korea helped Russia, and how much more might they be able to help them in this conflict?
Well, North Korea has just almost unlimited stocks of ammunition, artillery shells, and they have already shipped to Russia for use on the battlefield in Ukraine what is, by State Department count, 11,000 shipping containers full of ammunition. So North Korea has given Putin some badly needed short-term relief in weapons supplies and allowed Putin to keep the pressure on in Ukraine while he tries to gear up his own defense establishment to start turning out weapons to take the place of the sort of stopgap supplies coming from North Korea.
And now, David, I want to switch to the Israel-Hamas war. How far apart, before I ask you about the specific fight, how far apart is the U.S. and Israel when it comes to understanding the direction of this conflict, this fight against Hamas?
Well, I think the U.S. and Israel agree on one thing, that the fighting in Rafah is near its end, that there's not much left that Israel can do in Rafah. But where they are just miles apart is what happens next. Israel's objective is supposedly the destruction of Hamas. There are hundreds of surviving Hamas fighters. There are miles of unexplored tunnels, and their leader, Yahya Sinwar, is still at large. So Hamas has the ability to fight on. And if Israel just pulls out, then it's the U.S. view that Hamas is just going to flow back in, and the cycle of this, what we used to call the never-ending war against terrorism, is just going to continue again in Gaza.
So finally, David, what do you make of this back and forth about whether U.S. Shipments to Israel have been slowed or not slowed? I mean, obviously there was that one shipment that was paused, but give me your take on that.
Well, what I'm told is that the Israeli military was complaining to Netanyahu that they weren't getting some of the consumables they needed, not big-ticket items, but I'm talking about things like airplane spare parts that you need to keep your Air Force running on a day-to-day operation. And they were complaining that it seemed like the U.S. was slow-rolling them. I'm told the U.S. was not slow-rolling them, that the only shipment that has been in any way held up was that one shipment, and it literally was a shipment aboard a ship that was loading on the East Coast, bound for Israel, that contained the I think it was 1,500, 2,000-pound bombs that the U.S. did not want to see Israel use in a populated area like Gaza. And as far as I know, since that shipment was paused, Israel has not used any 2,000-pound bombs in Gaza.
David Martin for us at the Pentagon. Thank you so much, David.
Sure.
It is a long, hot summer, and it's only the first official day of summer. The long foretold warm weather is setting the records as it sits on the United States this Thursday, which is also the longest day of the year. High temperatures are now being seen across the east as a heat dome intensifies over the area. Roughly 75 million people are currently under excessive heat warnings or advisories. A new study finds that human-caused climate change is responsible for the recent heat wave in the Southwest. In New York City, temperatures reached a high of 92 degrees Fahrenheit Thursday. Governor Kathy Hochul activated the state's heat emergency plan, opening cooling centers and working to move homeless people indoors. In the south, Tropical Storm Alberto has weakened to a tropical depression now hovering over Mexico. At least 3 people have been killed by the weather system. CBS News national correspondent Dave Malkoff has the latest from Texas, where multiple areas are still experiencing flooding.
Hi, John. The Texas-sized heat and humidity have returned here now that the storm has pushed on. But now we still have a lot of wind. That is part of the reason why we actually have all of this storm surge right here in Corpus Christi that just has not gone away. It is still pushing. You can see the wave action, how it keeps on pushing. We haven't had much of the water receding, maybe a little bit in the past hour, but a lot of people in these hotels back here and those condos back there here on North Beach will have to spend another day stranded in their hotels. Some people have tried to walk out. Some people have tried to drive out and failed. We have seen many, many cars that had to be pushed out of here with families inside as well. This storm went on shore near Tampico, Mexico in the early morning hours. It was a tropical storm for Alberto. Then it was a tropical depression. Now it has dissipated, but we can still feel the wind left over from those bands. The bad news is that the water is very, very warm here, John, and that means that the hurricane season could be one for the record books, according to NOAA. We already have two systems out there, one in the southern Caribbean and one just off the coast of Florida that could develop in the next 24 hours, John.
Dave Malkoff, thank you. In New Mexico, the mixed blessing of heavy rain during a wildfire. Two fast-moving wildfires in the state burned roughly 23,000 acres and have killed at least 2 people. Wednesday, intense storms coincided with the blazes. Rains can help crews extinguish the flames, but because the ground is damaged, it can't hold water, which increases the risk of flooding. And more ground will be damaged. The fires, which started this week, are 0% contained as of Thursday afternoon, according to officials. With 10 days left in the month and more than a dozen rulings left to go, the Supreme Court chipped away at its docket of cases on Thursday. In one of 4 decisions handed down, the High Court voted 7-2 to uphold the Trump-era mandatory reparation tax. The law imposed a one-time tax on Americans with shares of foreign companies, even if they had not sold those shares. If the court had blocked the tax, it would have undermined the law and other tax laws by changing existing definitions related to taxation. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. She's also a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. Jessica, excellent as always to see you. This case was about a specific law, but the larger issue was about Congress's power to tax, right?
Well, that's exactly right. This was about a fairly obscure portion of the tax code. It was part of the 2017 reforms that were implemented, and it asked whether or not Congress had the power. Again, this is a powers question, whether under the taxing clause, Congress had the power to say you can be taxed on undistributed profits from portions of a corporation that you own. In this case, the Moores owned part of a foreign corporation, and they had not yet received the profits from the corporation. They hadn't sold their shares, and their dividends were being reinvested. So they were basically saying, this isn't fair to tax us. It doesn't qualify, in part, this was their argument, it doesn't qualify as income. And the taxing clause said, you can only tax on income. So it did bring up these much bigger questions. I think former Representative Paul Ryan said, if the court, in fact, ruled in favor of the Moores, it could upend more than 30% of the tax code.
Because all those definitions would bounce around now under a new interpretation. That didn't happen. But then now there is speculation about how this ruling might leave the door open for Congress, assuming there's a Democratic majority, because they support this, to adopt a wealth tax in the future. Explain how that might be the case.
So the question, of course, 2 definitional issues. One is how we define a wealth tax. But if it's based on unrealized income, assets that you have not sold, for instance, because typically the sale is the triggering event for a tax, can you tax somebody in part, I'm being very broad here, but based on their wealth? I will say I counted at least 4 members of the court who are saying, we want to go further and explain that a wealth tax would not be constitutional under Congress's taxing power. So we don't count to 5, but I also heard in the majority opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh saying many times, don't read this to mean anything more than it does. So first, John, as you know, you would need the political will to pass a tax like this. And then second, you would need the court to bless it. Right now, I think 4 members of the court are saying we would be reticent about that.
Right. So not really leaving the door open the way some people have claimed. Let me, before I lose you, Jessica, quickly There's still a lot to come from the court. Remind us of a couple of the big decisions that are still floating out there. And do you expect, given how much is still left to come, that the court might extend beyond the traditional end of June into July, maybe?
Typically, I say end of the fiscal year, end of the Supreme Court term. June 30th, we're all done here. And that might not be the case. Let's remember, there's nothing in the law that says they need to be done by June 30th. I think that's an old relic of when former Justice Brennan liked to go on vacation at a certain period of time. So this is just their tradition. Now, having said that, what's not left? There's the big question of whether or not former presidents enjoy absolute or qualified immunity from criminal prosecution. There's another big question that will affect the criminal trials pending against Trump, or at least one of them, dealing with whether or not the obstruction statute that Trump is charged under is a good fit for what happened on January 6th, or if that really just has to involve some type of evidence tampering. There's a big abortion case dealing with a federal law that says you have to provide people who walk into emergency room doors with necessary stabilizing treatment. And that's up against an Idaho law that says no abortions unless we are saving the life of the pregnant woman. And we haven't even gotten to guns. We haven't even gotten to social media and the First Amendment. Lots left in the next probably 2 weeks.
And we'll be back talking to you about all of them when they happen. Jessica Levinson, thanks as always. TikTok lawyers accuse the federal government of violating the First Amendment. Coming up, the video app goes to court over a federal law that could ban it for millions of American users. Plus, 40 state governments are led by a single political party. We'll hear what the consequences of a one-party rule are. From the former governor of Indiana. That's next. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
TikTok is asking a federal appeals court to prevent or delay the enforcement of a law that could ban the app in the United States. TikTok argues the law, quote, sets a dangerous precedent, allowing the political branches to target a disfavored speech platform. A legal filing submitted Thursday reiterates TikTok's prior claims that the law is overly broad and violates its First Amendment rights. President Biden signed legislation earlier this year that would ban TikTok in the United States by mid-January, unless the app divests from its Chinese-based parent company, ByteDance. Lawmakers believe the current ownership arrangement might allow the Chinese government access to personal data or to influence users on the platform. New York is the latest state to implement a law meant to restrict children's use of social media. Governor Kathy Hochul signed a, quote, Safe for Kids Act into law on Thursday. It bans social media apps like Instagram or TikTok from using recommendation algorithms for users under 18.
Weaponized to use children's personal information, extracting millions of data points about their preferences, what they want to do, where they're going. They use all this to hold them captive to a barrage of unsolicited images and messages, and that must be stopped right now.
The law is expected to face legal challenges. Social media companies have already filed lawsuits against other states with similar laws, including California. Since the turn of the century, the U.S. has seen a majority of its state governments completely lean in one political direction or another, regardless of the party. 40 states have one-party control of the governorship and both legislative bodies, also known as a trifecta government. It's a dramatic shift from the early 2000s, when 3/5 of the country had reasonable political balance between the two majority parties. In an opinion piece for the Washington Post, former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels argues that the structural forces of this kind of government lead to bad lawmaking. Former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels joins us now. Governor, it's great to be with you. What's wrong with power being in the hands of one party across the state?
It doesn't necessarily lead to bad government. My own state of Indiana has, I think, been very responsibly governed, John, but in the last 10 or 15 years with one-party domination. But everywhere in life, business, and certainly in politics, competition is healthier. And particularly in our politics, the absence of it leads, I think, to candidates doing what makes sense, which is competing and campaigning to the edges, paying little or no attention to the broader issues that might unite their states, might speak more to things we have in common, as opposed to things that the most ardent of their supporters are most interested in.
In your experience, how did this work when you had to worry about an electorate that was a little bit more representative and not just worried about speaking to the edge?
It meant that first in campaigning and then in governing, we were always trying to think of those things that might bring people together, that they might come together around, and that in half of our 8 years, we had to work with a divided legislature. So we looked for issues that our Democratic friends might be similarly interested in. If there were issues that they weren't, sometimes we tried to at least cut them in, those who were willing to come with us. I think it led to, again, a greater spirit of communitarianism in our state. Certainly led us to do big things as opposed to small and narrower concerns that were of not of interest to the whole.
How did we get here, Governor?
I think there are a number of social research has identified a number of potential causes. The nationalization of news, John. So many people watching you and your counterparts as local news, particularly print journalism, has collapsed. I think a very unfortunate trend. That's played a role. Social media, of course, has tended to accent the uglier or more strident, at least, modes of communication and the issue choices. So, and there's been social clustering that has been chronicled for some time. And so all these things together, they're nobody's fault necessarily, but I don't think they are conducive to the kind of politics that speaks to our broader interest or our better natures.
So as a final question, is there a way, Governor, to change the structural incentives so that lawmakers have to reach to a larger electorate? Any suggestions that you think have merit?
There may be. I personally believe that restoring to the parties a greater ability to greater authority and control over nominations and over dollars might once again move them to their historic role of competing for a broad majority. I think that if that doesn't happen, and it's unlikely, then we might need to take a look at ranked choice voting and some of these other mechanisms that are being suggested now. But the real antidote is, in a non-competitive state, for the out party to rethink itself and to re-examine how it became pushed to the sidelines and reform its policy positions and its selection of candidates and become competitive once again.
Former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels, thank you so much, Governor. Louisiana's governor signed into law Wednesday a requirement for all public classrooms to display the 10 Commandments in the Bible. Starting in kindergarten, when most kids first learn their ABCs, classrooms will exhibit a poster no smaller than 11 by 14 inches and written in, quote, large, easily readable font. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Shall not covet thy neighbor. Similar bills have also been proposed in other Republican-led states, including Texas, Oklahoma, and Utah. Civil rights groups sued Louisiana hours after the governor signed the bill into law, arguing it violates the separation of church and state. 2 astronauts will spend more time than planned in outer space due to issues with a spacecraft. The pair traveled to the International Space Station on the Boeing Starliner earlier this month, but on the way there, the craft experienced thruster malfunction and helium leaks. Now, their trip back to Earth has been delayed. The astronauts won't return home until at least June 26th, nearly doubling their planned week-long stay. Cargo from one of the world's oldest shipwrecks has resurfaced after more than 3,000 years underwater. The vessel from 13 to 1400 BC was discovered on the floor of the Mediterranean Sea, nearly 60 miles from Israel. In a happy accident, researchers were conducting a standard oil and gas survey when they found the relic. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, the discovery of a Bronze Age ship so far from land indicates that sailors were able to use the stars to navigate much earlier than previously believed, making a huge advancement for mankind. 2 large jars were recovered from the wreckage. Using special tools, researchers believe they belong to the ancient Middle Eastern Canaanite people who lived along the shores in the early days of Egyptian pharaoh King Tut. As for what happened to them, the ship is estimated to have sunk in peril either during a storm or a piracy attack. Still to come, Britain's ruling party could potentially lose big in the next month's general election. What the polls are saying about the ruling Conservatives. Here's Streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. South Korea says it will reconsider a longstanding policy that prevents it from directly supplying weapons to active conflict zones. In this case, Ukraine. The shift comes after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a defense deal Wednesday, prompting grave concern from Seoul. The Supreme Court upheld a Trump-era tax on foreign earnings Thursday. In a 7-2 ruling, justices said the policy, which imposes a one-time tax on Americans with shares of foreign companies, is constitutional. The court still has 17 opinions to issue by the end of the term, which is usually by the end of June. Parts of Mexico and the Texas coast saw heavy flooding in the wake of Tropical Storm Alberto. That was later downgraded to a tropical depression. Forecasters predict Alberto, the first named storm of this year's Atlantic hurricane season, will continue to move west and dissipate Thursday night. For the past 14 years, the UK has been led by its Conservative Party, the Tories. But that could soon change. Polling from our partners at the BBC show the Labour Party is on track to win the largest share of parliamentary seats in the upcoming July 4th election. Prime Minister Sunak's own Conservative Party is polling at 21%. Some estimates have the Tories winning as few as 72 seats compared to the 365 seats they won in 2019's general election. Adrian Wooldridge joins me now. He's a global business columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. Adrian, it's great to have you with us. Why is this happening to the Conservative Party?
Well, what's happening to the Conservative Party is extraordinary. It's either going to be a catastrophe or an apocalypse for them. Why is it happening? Because they ruled for 14 years. And for many of those years, they've ruled extremely badly, and people are really tired of it.
And are they tired with Conservatives particularly, or are they just kicking out the group that's been in power for 14 years and we need change?
I think there's a big anti-incumbency sentiment. So in Scotland, for example, where you've got the Scottish Nationalist Party in power, they're also being kicked out. So people are angry about what's going on, but they're particularly angry with the Conservatives for several reasons, one of which is that there's been a very chaotic set of policies or institutions. You know, if you've been Secretary of State for Education for 2 months, you're given a long-time service award. They've been changing their people. We've had 5 prime ministers since 2016, sort of Italian levels of chaos. But more than that, they promised that Brexit would change the country fundamentally, make people richer, provide lots and lots of resources for the National Health Service. The last election, which the Tories won with a majority of 80 in 2019, led by Boris Johnson, was get Brexit done. That was their promise. We got Brexit done, and the country hasn't got better. It's probably got worse.
And so where, if I'm a conservative, am I just staying home? Am I going somewhere else? What's happening with the voter?
It depends where you are. If you're a so-called red wall conservative, who are the people who came from the Labour Party, classic Labour voters who shifted to the Conservatives in 2019, lured by Brexit and Boris Johnson, you're going home to the Labour Party, or you're going back to the Labour Party. If you're in the South, a more prosperous, middle-class, traditional Conservative voter, you may well be going to the Lib Dems. So they're being attacked on both sides. They're losing core supporters from both sides.
So now let's talk about the other side, the Labour Party. Is the Labour Party just the beneficiary of all of this unhappy sentiment, or does it have a character or cast that we can define?
The Labour Party is promising stability. They're promising getting rid of the clown show and bringing serious, sensible adults back in charge of the country. It's not like 1997, when Tony Blair was a really exciting new figure when he represented the force of change. It's the force of, stability, of sensible politics. But what is extraordinary is that Keir Starmer is not a great politician, certainly not an exciting politician, but he may well be the person who gets the biggest Labour majority in the history of the Labour Party. It's quite extraordinary what is happening.
And what would happen if he gets this enormous majority? Just what could the possible outcomes be in terms of daily life and policy and that kind of thing?
Well, one of the things that could happen, we have a system in Britain of elective dictatorship, essentially. There is no constraint on the power of the Prime Minister, not very much legal constraint. The minority party doesn't really have any rights. It's very different from the system you have here of checks and balances. So he could do pretty much what he wants. Now, he's a very sensible person. He's got the Corbynite left of the party either expelled or under control. So I suspect that it will be a centrist, middle-of-the-road, very well-disciplined government.
Now, you are a student of American politics. You covered America for a very long time living here. There used to be a kind of connectivity between British politics and American politics. Do you see anything that's happening there that's connected to American politics?
Well, many people might look at Britain and see the collapse of the Conservative Party and say, well, this bodes very well for the election if they happen to be anti-Trump Democrats. I don't think it does, really. I think the Republican Party will win or lose independent of this. There is not, I think, a big shift to the left globally. In fact, across Europe, you're seeing a shift to the right. There is an anti-incumbent sentiment all around the world. You see it in India, you see it in France, you see it in Britain. So I don't think it presages anything particularly good for either Biden or Trump. You could treat it as anti-incumbency, you could treat it as anti-chaos. Trump is chaos, but Biden is incumbency.
Does this analogy hold, that in 2020 there was this argument in America that essentially Biden was not a dynamic force for a new generation. He was stability after the excessive Trump years. Is that happening in the UK, but just 4 years later?
There's definitely a vote for stability, and there's definitely, they try and use some of the rhetoric of Biden, such as security. Securonomics is the Rachel Reeves is terribly clumsy formulation of what they're offering. So I think that is an analogy. But another interesting thing is that the Tories, in power for 14 years, introduced Brexit, pushed it through, and are subjected to a verdict on Brexit, which is actually, it wasn't very good. Now, Trump, who came in at exactly the same time as Brexit, isn't being held accountable for his policies, well, because he was kicked out of power and is now coming in as a force for change. The other interesting thing that's happening in Britain is that Nigel Farage, who is a Trumpist, close to Trump and represents Trump's policies, could be becoming a force in British politics. We don't yet know what's going to happen there, but he's certainly taking a lot of votes from the Conservative Party.
Bloomberg's Adrian Wooldridge. Thanks so much, Adrian. Thank you. A trial against a Russian-American woman charged with treason began Thursday in Russia. Amateur ballerina Ksenia Karelina is accused of donating $51 to a Ukrainian charity. She was arrested earlier this year while visiting family in the city of Yekaterinburg. A 33-year-old Los Angeles resident faces 12 years to life in a Russian prison if convicted. At least a dozen American citizens are currently being detained in Russia. That includes Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. whose espionage trial begins there next Wednesday. After 12 weeks stuck aboard the Dolly cargo ship that crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, some of the crew members could soon return home. This comes after an agreement was reached by the ship's owner and lawyers representing the city of Baltimore. Per the terms of the agreement, lawyers will be allowed to question the crew members as needed for their investigation into the crash. 8 of the 21 members, all of whom originate from India or Sri Lanka, are set to head home as soon as Thursday, according to court filings. The number of Americans applying for unemployment benefits dropped last week. New data from the Labor Department Thursday showed that 238,000 people applied for jobless claims. That's down 5,000 from a 10-month high the week prior. But the latest reading is higher than the forecast of 235,000. Unemployment, meanwhile, is still at a historically low level of 4%, a sign the job market and economy remain strong despite high interest rates from the central bank to cool inflation. We're hearing more about a new type of employee, personality hires. They have also been referred to as chief vibes officers. According to the Wall Street Journal, these are people who make workplaces more fun but lack hard technical skills. So why are they being hired? Because the morale at many workplaces is low. According to a Gallup report, almost half of workers say they feel a lot of stress in their jobs. Another 49% are actively looking for new opportunities. To make up for that, bosses are now looking for good workplace energy through personality hires, employees who can light up unhappy offices with their positivity. Still to come, the dangers of microplastics. We know they meet the furthest edges of our planet, but how severe is the risk, and can anything be done to reduce it? We'll speak with an expert. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need
thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Microplastics are everywhere, which is both a description of the number of stories and studies related to the phenomena and the content of those stories and studies, which attest to the pervasive nature of microplastics. Before we talk about what can be done, though, a quick explainer. Humans currently produce about 430 million tons of plastic waste each year, according to the United Nations. A large amount of that waste ends up degrading into microplastics, small particles that linger in our environment and can be consumed by animals and people. How do they form? Large plastics break down through physical abrasion, weathering, and other processes, releasing microplastics into rivers, oceans, groundwater, and the air. There are 5 different varieties. Fibers, commonly shed from clothes, these can be as big as 1/5 of an inch. Fragments, created when larger plastics, such as water bottles, break down. Film, made from the degradation of larger plastic items. Foam, generated from food containers and disposable silverware. And microbeads, synthetically manufactured microplastics used in cosmetics and healthcare products, including hand sanitizer. Microplastics spread through the water, air, and even human bloodstream. They've been found everywhere from the deepest oceanic trench in the world to the top of Mount Everest. In just the upper oceans alone, there are an estimated 24.4 trillion microplastics, according to Japanese researchers. Those microplastics are consumed by smaller animals, such as zooplankton, who are then eaten by larger animals. The particles stay in that larger animal's stomach and can be eventually passed up to humans. People inhale or ingest up to 114,000 microplastic particles per year through drinking, breathing, and eating, according to a 2019 study. Humans aren't just at risk of consuming regular microplastics, but also the more dangerous nanoplastics. Those particles are about 400 thousandths of an inch in size and can pass through the bloodstream to reach almost every single organ. Plastic particles have been found in a variety of human organs, including testicles, the liver, and lungs. They've even been found in the placenta and in the bodies of newborns. Joining us now to talk about the possible health risks from all this exposure to microplastics is Matthew Kempen. He's a professor at the University of New Mexico and the director of the school's Center for Metals in Biology and Medicine. Thank you so much for being with us. So what are the effects of micro and nanoplastics being present in the human body?
John, thanks for having me and for that outstanding introduction. The harmful effects, the best research right now is coming from a group in Italy who published showing that the amount of blood vessel content of plastics is associated with a 3-fold increase of potential heart attack within the next 3 years. That study has been sort of bolstered by a number of animal research with controlled exposures and a number of cell culture studies that gives us compelling evidence that every organ in the body could be suffering at the concentrations that we're seeing now.
So, Professor, as I sit here talking to you, is it possible to guess how much microplastics are inside me?
I could wager a guess.
All right, give me a shot.
All right. So most of our organs seem to be hovering around 300 to 600 micrograms per gram, and that's probably difficult to understand. It's a small drop in every organ, probably. But when we look at the brain, we see about 10 times that amount. And we're talking about an adult human brain probably has around 5 to 10 grams of plastic. That's about the size of a plastic spoon, but they're nanoplastics, so you can't even see them without very elaborate, sophisticated scientific equipment.
Well, that's disturbing. Let me ask you this double question then. A, the larger societal one, what can be done to reduce these kinds of plastics? And then, is there anything one can do if you've already got them as a part of your organs?
Great questions. Let's start with, the societal question is big. From my perspective, I feel that incineration of these plastics is going to be the best thing to do, and we need to consider more aggressive construction and implementation of waste-to-energy treatment plants. Right now, half of all those plastics that you talked about, the more than 1 ton of plastics per person on this planet, it is already in the ground, and it's already turning into microplastics. So even if we reduce or eliminate plastics, I think the UN goal is to eliminate plastic usage by 2040. Well, we still have billions of tons in the ground turning into microplastics. We haven't dented that growth at all. So my fear is that over the next 20 to 40 years, we're going to see double, triple, quadruple the amount of plastics in our bodies, and there will be health effects that stem from that. As for what we can do as individuals, right now, the best advice that our team has is to reduce the amount of fats and meats in your diet. The biggest amount of uptake into your body is through ingestion. We don't think that, it's good advice not to use a plastic cutting board, just because that's a piece of plastic that this planet probably doesn't need. But on the other hand, that's not really a great source for the generation of plastics that your body can absorb. So there's a number of pieces of advice out there that aren't necessarily scientifically sound, but the dietary piece with meats and fats is probably the best bet.
Professor Matthew Camp and I feel like we're going to be coming back to you on this one. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Still to come, it's being hailed as the, quote, greatest recovery of a cat species ever achieved. How the Iberian lynx came back from the brink. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People
people looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome. Tributes, we welcome you. Happy Hunger Games, and may the odds be ever in your favor.
That was actor Donald Sutherland portraying the tyrannical President Snow in the hit movie The Hunger Games. The Emmy Award winner died on Thursday. Throughout his more than 50-year career in TV and film, Sutherland gained nearly 200 credits to his name. He took on dozens of projects from The Dirty Dozen and MASH to Animal House. In a statement, his son Kiefer said, quote, "He loved what he did and he did what he loved. And one can never ask for more than that, a life well lived." Donald Sutherland was 88 years old. Conservationists say the Iberian lynx is pouncing back from the brink of extinction. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has removed the pointy-eared wildcat, native to Spain and Portugal, from its endangered species list. In 2001, the IUCN said there were only 62 mature Iberian lynxes on the Iberian Peninsula. Now, there are more than 2,000. Conservationists say the key to their survival has been the local repopulation of rabbits, which are a main food source for the Iberian lynx. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. The United States will begin redirecting weapons intended for other allies to Ukraine. Why the Biden administration says the move is necessary. Plus, it's the first official day of summer and millions of Americans are under heat alerts. What parts of Texas are underwater? We are tracking the severe weather across the country, and the Supreme Court still has a number of decisions to hand down as the term nears its end. A look at some of the key items still on the docket. You're streaming the Daily Report.